Have you noticed your ADHD symptoms becoming more unpredictable despite medication? Or perhaps you're experiencing increased brain fog, emotional volatility, or declining cognitive performance that your doctor can't explain. What if I told you that specific foods in your daily diet could be actively damaging your brain and amplifying your ADHD symptoms in ways most healthcare providers never discuss? I'm Dr. Emily Thompson, and after working with ADHD patients for over 12 years, I've discovered a critical connection between certain dietary patterns and accelerated neurological damage that particularly affects people with ADHD. This isn't just about sugar or food dyes. It's about specific food combinations and timing patterns that create a perfect neurological storm in the ADHD brain. What's particularly concerning is that many of these problematic foods are actually recommended as healthy in mainstream nutrition advice. Yet for the unique neurophysiology of ADHD, they can trigger inflammatory cascades, neurotransmitter disruption, and even structural brain changes over time. Stay with me because I'm going to reveal exactly which foods pose the greatest risk to the ADHD brain, the warning signs that your diet may be harming your cognitive function, and most importantly, the evidence-based nutrition strategies that can not only protect your brain, but actually optimize your neurological function and ADHD symptom management. If you've been struggling with worsening ADHD symptoms or unexplained cognitive difficulties, drop a comment below telling me which symptoms have been most challenging for you. There's a good chance your diet could be a significant contributing factor. This video is specifically for anyone with ADHD who's found that standard treatments aren't providing consistent symptom relief, or who's experiencing progressive cognitive difficulties despite appropriate medication and behavioral strategies. If you find yourself with fluctuating focus, increasing emotional dysregulation, memory issues, or energy levels that crash unexpectedly, this information is going to be eye-opening for you. I see patients every week who are doing everything right according to conventional ADHD management, taking their medication as prescribed, using organizational systems, implementing behavioral strategies, yet still struggling with symptoms that seem to worsen or fluctuate dramatically for no apparent reason. Many have been told their difficulties are just part of having ADHD, or that they need to accept certain limitations, when in reality, unrecognized dietary factors may be significantly exacerbating their neurological challenges. Does this sound familiar? Maybe you've noticed that some days your medication seems to work perfectly, while on others, it barely touches your symptoms despite taking the same dose. Perhaps you experience unpredictable energy crashes, moments of intense brain fog, or emotional outbursts that seem to come out of nowhere. Or maybe you've tried various elimination diets or brain-healthy eating plans without clear results, leaving you confused about what truly works for your ADHD brain. If you're nodding your head right now, I want you to know that these inconsistencies aren't just in your imagination, nor are they necessarily an inherent part of ADHD that you must accept. The neurophysiology of the ADHD brain creates unique sensitivities to certain dietary factors, sensitivities that can dramatically impact your symptom experience, medication effectiveness, and long-term brain health in ways that most healthcare providers simply aren't trained to recognize or address. Before I reveal the specific foods and patterns that pose the greatest risk to the ADHD brain, if you're finding this information helpful so far, please take a quick second to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. This not only helps more people find this important information, but it also lets me know to create more ADHD-specific content that addresses these overlooked physiological factors. So what exactly makes the ADHD brain particularly vulnerable to dietary damage? And which foods pose the greatest risk? To understand this, we need to look at 4 key neurobiological differences that create unique nutritional needs and sensitivities in people with ADHD. First, research consistently shows that people with ADHD have altered inflammatory responses, particularly in the brain. A landmark 2022 study published in Molecular Psychiatry found that individuals with ADHD showed 32 to 47% higher levels of neuroinflammatory markers in response to the same dietary triggers compared to neurotypical controls. This heightened inflammatory response directly impacts dopamine signaling, myelin integrity, and blood-brain barrier function, all critical factors in ADHD symptom expression and overall cognitive health. Second, people with ADHD typically have differences in gut microbiome composition and gut permeability. A comprehensive 2023 review in the Journal of Attention Disorders analyzed 24 studies and found consistent patterns of reduced microbial diversity and overrepresentation of pro-inflammatory bacterial species in individuals with ADHD. This altered gut environment affects not only how you digest and absorb nutrients, but also directly influences neurotransmitter production, as approximately 50% of your dopamine and 90% of your serotonin is produced or regulated by gut-based processes. Third, those with ADHD often show impaired methylation and detoxification pathways, the biochemical systems responsible for processing nutrients and removing potentially harmful compounds from your body. Research from the University of California found that up to 70% of individuals with ADHD have at least one genetic variation affecting these pathways, making them less efficient at converting nutrients into their active forms and more vulnerable to the negative effects of certain food compounds. Fourth, the ADHD brain typically has greater energy demands, yet less stable energy supply systems. Studies using advanced imaging techniques have demonstrated that certain regions in the ADHD brain, particularly the prefrontal cortex, anterior cingulate, and parts of the striatum, require up to 20% more glucose to function optimally compared to the same regions in neurotypical brains. This creates a precarious energy situation where even minor disruptions in glucose availability or utilization can have outsized effects on cognitive function. Given these neurobiological differences, let's examine the 5 food categories that pose the greatest risk to the ADHD brain. The first and perhaps most damaging category is highly processed vegetable and seed oils, particularly those rich in omega-6 fatty acids like soybean oil, corn oil, sunflower oil, and safflower oil. These oils are ubiquitous in packaged foods, restaurant meals, and even many health products. Yet they create a perfect storm of neurological damage for the ADHD brain. The problem stems from these oils' extreme omega-6 to omega-3 ratio and their high content of oxidized lipids. In the context of the ADHD brain's already heightened inflammatory responses, these compounds trigger cascades of neuroinflammation that directly damage myelin, the protective coating around nerve fibers that's essential for efficient neural transmission. A groundbreaking 2022 study in biological psychiatry used advanced imaging techniques to demonstrate that regular consumption of these oils was associated with accelerated myelin deterioration, specifically in the prefrontal cortex and corpus callosum, brain regions critically involved in executive function that are already compromised in ADHD. The second highly problematic food category involves high glycemic carbohydrates consumed in isolation, particularly when they constitute the first meal of the day or are consumed during medication peak times. This includes not just obvious sugary foods, but also healthy options like fruit juices, smoothie bowls, granola, breakfast cereals, white rice, and many gluten-free products. The issue here involves the unique glucose metabolism challenges in the ADHD brain. When you consume high glycemic carbohydrates without adequate protein, fat, and fiber to slow their absorption, you create rapid glucose spikes followed by reactive hypoglycemia, a blood sugar crash. For the ADHD brain, which already has unstable energy supply systems and heightened sensitivity to glucose fluctuations, these crashes trigger a cascade of stress hormones that both exacerbate ADHD symptoms and promote neuroinflammation. A 2023 study in the Journal of Attention Disorders used continuous glucose monitoring to demonstrate that individuals with ADHD experience 64% greater cognitive impairment during these reactive hypoglycemic episodes compared to neurotypical controls, despite similar blood glucose measurements. The researchers found that these glucose fluctuations were associated with temporary reductions in prefrontal cortex activity of up to 30 to 40%, essentially creating periods of significantly amplified ADHD symptoms that many patients mistakenly attribute to their medication wearing off. The third category with substantial evidence for neurological harm involves artificial food additives, specifically certain preservatives, flavor enhancers, and synthetic colors. While the connection between food dyes and ADHD symptoms has received some attention, the mechanism and extent of potential damage is rarely discussed in detail. The concern centers around these compounds' effects on both mitochondrial function and neurotransmitter signaling in the ADHD brain. Research published in Toxicology Sciences demonstrated that several common preservatives, including BHT, BHA, and TBHQ, and flavor enhancers directly impair mitochondrial energy production in neurons. For the ADHD brain, which already has higher energy demands and less stable supply systems, this mitochondrial disruption can significantly impair cognitive function and amplify symptoms. The fourth problematic category involves gluten-containing grains, but not for the reasons typically discussed in popular health media. The issue isn't necessarily celiac disease or even non-celiac gluten sensitivity, but rather gluten's unique effect on zonulin signaling and blood-brain barrier integrity in the context of ADHD neurobiology. Emerging research suggests that up to 40 to 60% of individuals with ADHD show heightened zonulin responses to gluten exposure, even without traditional symptoms of gluten sensitivity. Zonulin is a protein that regulates tight junction permeability in both the intestinal lining and the blood-brain barrier. When zonulin is elevated, these barriers become more permeable, potentially allowing inflammatory compounds to access the brain. The fifth category involves common dietary allergens and sensitivities beyond gluten, particularly dairy, eggs, and certain types of nuts. While not everyone with ADHD will be sensitive to these foods, research suggests that the prevalence of both IgE-mediated allergies and IgG-mediated sensitivities is 2 to 3 times higher in the ADHD population compared to neurotypical individuals. The concern centers around how these immune responses affect neurological function, specifically in the context of ADHD. A 2022 study in the Journal of Neuroinflammation used sophisticated imaging techniques to demonstrate that when ADHD participants consumed foods they were sensitive to, even without obvious physical symptoms, they experienced measurable increases in inflammatory markers and altered blood flow specifically in the prefrontal cortex, anterior cingulate cortex, and striatum, the exact brain regions most involved in attention, executive function, and impulse control. Now that we understand these 5 high-risk food categories, let's examine the warning signs that your diet may be damaging your ADHD brain. The most important indicators include medication inconsistency. If your ADHD medication seems to work well some days, but poorly on others, despite taking the same dose, dietary factors may be interfering with its effectiveness. Symptom cycling. If you notice patterns where your ADHD symptoms worsen dramatically at certain times of day or certain days of the week, this often indicates dietary-triggered neuroinflammation or blood sugar dysregulation affecting your brain function. Post-meal cognitive changes. If you experience pronounced brain fog, fatigue, irritability, or attention problems within 30-90 minutes after eating certain meals, this suggests those foods may be triggering inflammatory responses or neurotransmitter disruption. Sleep architecture disturbances. If you have difficulty falling asleep despite being tired, wake frequently during the night, or wake unrefreshed despite adequate sleep duration, dietary-induced neuroinflammation may be disrupting your sleep architecture. Emotional dysregulation patterns. If you experience sudden mood swings, disproportionate emotional reactions, or periods of unexplained anxiety that seem disconnected from external circumstances, food-triggered inflammatory responses affecting your limbic system may be responsible. So what should you eat to protect and optimize your ADHD brain? Here are 5 key strategies. The first strategy involves stabilizing glucose metabolism through strategic meal composition and timing. Rather than focusing just on what you eat, this approach emphasizes how you structure your meals to provide stable energy to your ADHD brain. The most effective approach uses the protein-first principle, beginning each meal or snack with protein before consuming other macronutrients. Research shows that this simple sequencing trick can reduce post-meal glucose spikes by up to 39% and extend the duration of stable blood glucose by 2 to 3 hours. For the ADHD brain, which is hypersensitive to glucose fluctuations, this creates a dramatically more stable energy environment for optimal neural function. The ideal meal composition for the ADHD brain typically includes 25 to 30 grams of protein, abundant non-starchy vegetables, moderate healthy fats, and smaller amounts of complex carbohydrates. This macronutrient ratio provides the optimal balance of steady energy, neurotransmitter precursors, and anti-inflammatory compounds to support cognitive function. The second strategy focuses on reducing neuroinflammation through strategic inclusion of anti-inflammatory compounds specifically shown to benefit the ADHD brain. Rather than general healthy eating advice, this targets the exact inflammatory pathways most problematic in ADHD. The most evidence-backed anti-inflammatory foods for ADHD include fatty fish rich in EPA omega-3s like salmon, sardines, and anchovies, deeply pigmented berries, especially blueberries, blackberries, and cherries, leafy greens, cruciferous vegetables, turmeric with black pepper, ginger, and green tea. These foods contain compounds that specifically target the inflammatory cascades most active in the ADHD brain and protect against oxidative damage to neurons. Equally important is the complete avoidance of highly processed vegetable and seed oils we discussed earlier. Replacing these with olive oil, avocado oil, coconut oil, and grass-fed butter or ghee eliminates a major source of neuroinflammation while providing compounds that actively support myelin health and neural membrane function. The third strategy addresses gut-brain axis optimization specifically for ADHD neurobiology. Given the altered microbiome patterns common in ADHD, targeted support for gut health can significantly improve both digestive function and neurological symptoms. The most effective approach combines 3 elements: regular consumption of fermented foods containing live probiotics like yogurt, kefir, sauerkraut, and kimchi, adequate prebiotic fibers that feed beneficial bacteria, found in foods like garlic, onions, leeks, asparagus, and Jerusalem artichokes, and specific polyphenol-rich foods that help regulate the gut-brain communication pathway, including coffee, dark chocolate, olive oil, and various herbs and spices. The fourth strategy involves optimizing methylation and detoxification through strategic nutrient timing and food combining. Given the common genetic variations affecting these pathways in ADHD, providing abundant cofactors through diet can significantly improve your brain's ability to synthesize neurotransmitters and clear potentially harmful compounds. The most crucial nutrients include folate from leafy greens, liver, and legumes, vitamin B6 from fish, poultry, and pistachios, vitamin B12 from animal products or supplements for those on plant-based diets, choline from eggs, liver, and soybeans, and sulfur-containing amino acids from quality animal proteins, alliums, and cruciferous vegetables. The fifth strategy addresses individualized sensitivity identification through a systematic approach to elimination and challenge. Given the highly individual nature of food sensitivities in ADHD, this personalized step is crucial for optimizing your unique neurochemistry. The most effective protocol involves a 3-week elimination of the most common reactive foods, including gluten, dairy, eggs, soy, corn, and artificial additives, followed by systematic reintroduction while carefully monitoring both physical symptoms and cognitive emotional changes. I recently worked with a patient named Jordan, not their real name, who came to me after struggling with progressively worsening ADHD symptoms despite being on a stable dose of medication that had previously worked well for them. They described feeling like their brain was deteriorating, experiencing increasing memory problems, emotional outbursts, and periods where their medication seemed to stop working entirely. After a comprehensive assessment, we discovered that Jordan's diet contained significant amounts of all 5 problematic food categories we've discussed. Their typical day included cereal with almond milk for breakfast, high glycemic carbs plus a potential sensitivity, lunch from fast food restaurants filled with seed oils and additives, and pasta-based dinners, gluten exposure. Despite considering themselves a healthy eater because they avoided obvious junk food, their diet was creating the perfect storm for neuroinflammation and neurotransmitter disruption. We implemented the dietary strategies I've outlined, with particular emphasis on the protein-first approach, elimination of processed oils, and a 3-week trial without gluten. The results were remarkable. Within just 10 days, Jordan reported significant improvements in their cognitive clarity, emotional stability, and medication effectiveness. After 6 weeks, they told me, it's like someone replaced my foggy, faulty brain with a high-definition version. I can think clearly again, my memory is sharper, and I'm not experiencing those inexplicable emotional meltdowns anymore. What was particularly striking was that Jordan's response to their medication became much more consistent. The same dose that had seemed increasingly ineffective now provided steady symptom control throughout the day. I was convinced I needed a higher dose or a different medication, they told me. It turns out I just needed to stop eating foods that were fighting against my brain's ability to function. Another patient, Taylor, had been diagnosed with ADHD in childhood, but found their symptoms becoming increasingly unmanageable in adulthood, particularly around focus, emotional regulation, and sleep quality. Despite trying multiple medications and therapy approaches, they continued to struggle, often missing work due to what they described as completely non-functional brain days that seemed to come without warning. When we analyzed Taylor's diet, we discovered they were particularly sensitive to both dairy and artificial additives, compounds present in many of the foods they consumed regularly, including their protein shakes, prepackaged lunches, and diet beverages. After eliminating these triggers and implementing the anti-inflammatory nutrition strategies, Taylor experienced what they described as a transformation in how my brain works. I know modifying your diet can feel overwhelming, especially with the executive function challenges that come with ADHD. That's why I suggest starting with just one simple change. Tomorrow morning, begin your day with at least 25-30 grams of protein, consumed before any carbohydrates or caffeine. This single adjustment can significantly stabilize your glucose metabolism and provide your brain with essential neurotransmitter precursors right when they are needed most. Next, focus on removing the most damaging category, processed vegetable and seed oils. Check labels for ingredients like soybean oil, corn oil, canola oil, sunflower oil, and safflower oil, and begin replacing products containing these with healthier alternatives. This single change can dramatically reduce the neuroinflammatory burden on your ADHD brain. To make implementation easier, I recommend what I call the replacement strategy rather than the elimination strategy. Instead of focusing on what you're removing from your diet, identify delicious and satisfying alternatives that support brain health. For every problematic food, find a brain-supporting replacement that you genuinely enjoy, making the transition feel like an upgrade rather than a deprivation. Consider keeping a simple symptom journal for the first few weeks, rating your focus, energy, mood stability, and sleep quality on a 1-10 scale daily. This objective tracking can provide encouraging evidence of your progress and help identify any remaining trigger foods that might be affecting your specific neurochemistry. Don't worry about perfection. Even implementing these changes 80% of the time can lead to significant improvements. Remember, your brain's neurological environment is constantly responding to what you feed it, and even small, consistent improvements in your dietary patterns can create meaningful changes in how your ADHD brain functions. If you found this information helpful so far, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps this evidence-based ADHD content reach more people who might be struggling with diet-related symptom worsening without realizing it. Plus, it lets me know to create more videos specifically addressing these overlooked physiological factors that can dramatically impact ADHD management. I truly hope these insights about how your diet affects your ADHD brain have been valuable to you. If they have, please consider sharing this video with someone else who might benefit from this information. We all know someone struggling with ADHD symptoms who might not realize how their food choices could be making their challenges significantly worse. Your share could be the turning point that helps them finally understand why they are struggling despite their best efforts with medication and behavioral strategies. Lastly, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Have you noticed connections between certain foods and your ADHD symptoms? Or if you implement some of these dietary changes, come back and let me know what differences you notice. Your experiences could help someone else in our community who's facing similar challenges, and I personally read every comment to understand what you're going through and what topics I should cover next. Thank you for watching, and remember, your ADHD brain has unique nutritional needs that, when properly addressed, can dramatically improve both your daily functioning and long-term cognitive health. I'll see you in the next video where we'll explore another evidence-based strategy for optimizing life with ADHD.